Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're putting on our literary scholar hats to really dig into the deep internal struggles at work within James Baldwin's powerful narrative, Go Tell It on the Mountain. We're going to break down the incredibly complex, honestly gripping conflict between religious duty and personal identity, a conflict that completely defines our protagonist's entire existence.
Okay, let's dive into this. The narrative anchors us on a very specific, monumental day. It's the morning of protagonist John Grimes's 14th birthday. But, he doesn't wake up with the joy you'd expect from a typical teenager. Instead, he wakes up to this suffocating sense of unspeaking doom. Just imagine that for a second, waking up on your 14th birthday, not with excitement, but with absolute dread. Baldwin drops us directly into John's mind here, a mind that's caught between the immense, crushing weight of his family's fierce religious expectations and his own desperate, quiet yearning for a totally different kind of life.
So to really understand John's journey, we're going to trace his conflict through 6 key areas: the world of Harlem, the Grimes household, the 2 sons, the heavy burden of religion, his internal rebellion, and finally, the threshing floor.
Starting with Section 1, the world of Harlem, looking at the sacred and the profane.
The avenue right outside their door is literally a battleground of stark contrasts. On one hand, you have the Grimes family's church, the Temple of the Fire Baptized, which is filled with saints wearing pure white caps that glow like crowns. But on the other hand, you have the harsh, gritty reality of the streets. This dichotomy perfectly illustrates the claustrophobic pressure that just constantly surrounds the family. They are trapped in this visual, everyday war between Sunday morning holiness and Saturday night secular temptation.
When John and his younger brother Roy are walking to church, they pass men and women with wrinkled, dusty clothes and harsh voices. And John, he feels terrified by this profane reality. He physically shrinks from it. But Roy is drawn to it. He actually finds it amusing. Roy even tells John about watching things happening down the block that John is simply too terrified to ever look at again. The streets represent literally everything the church condemns, yet they're right outside the sanctuary doors.
Moving into Section 2, the Grimes household, which is really a microcosm of oppression. This quote brilliantly illustrates the sheer genius of Baldwin's prose. He uses physical dirt and structural decay as a visceral metaphor for the inescapable weight of Gabriel's oppressive rule over the household. The narrow, dirty room, the sagging ceiling, the cracked walls, it doesn't matter how much John or his mother scrub, it's never going to be truly clean. The physical filth mirrors the emotional decay and the impossible standards of purity demanded by his father. It's such a powerful reminder of how our physical environments often reflect our deepest psychological realities.
And the source of all this domestic decay is John's father, Gabriel. Gabriel is a man of intense dual identity. At the pulpit, his face transforms into this awe-inspiring prophetic wrath. But at home, that holy fire twists into a cruel daily anger. Because Gabriel is God's minister, the ambassador of the King of Heaven, his home isn't a place of loving refuge, not at all. It's a fearful extension of divine judgment.
That brings us to Section 3, 2 sons, John and Roy.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how they're treated compared to who they actually are. The irony of their roles is just profound. We have John, who is expected to be the holy, good example, yet he is deeply fearful, alienated, and highly intellectual. Then we have Roy, who is wildly rebellious, constantly drawn to the violent streets, and literally gets stabbed in a fight with white boys. Yet, and here's the kicker, Gabriel vastly favors the unrestrained Roy over the obedient John.
So why this tragic irony? Well, as the text reveals, Gabriel views Roy as his true biological heir, quote, begotten in the marriage bed. To Gabriel, the kingdom was promised to Roy. John, meanwhile, is treated with this venomous disdain. Gabriel completely despises John's intellect and quiet nature, basically blinding himself to the fact that it is his beloved Roy who is violently spiraling out of control.
Let's look at Section 4, the burden of religion, the way of the cross.
The church environment they are in is intensely unforgiving. During a Sunday service, Father James publicly uncovers the sin of 2 teenagers, Elisha and Ella May. Their crime? Simply walking out alone together. The pastor warns the congregation that there is no room in God's army for the coward heart. I mean, just imagine the pressure of living under a microscope, where a simple walk with a friend is treated as a severe moral failing. Watching this public shaming unfold, John is terrified. He realizes that the church demands the absolute suppression of natural youth and romance. Suddenly, his own religious destiny feels imminent and completely inescapable.
So John completely internalizes this immense pressure. He starts viewing his own normal adolescent impulses as a profound, dark sin that sets him utterly against the expectations of the saints. He feels he has sinned a sin that is hard to forgive. But the true darkness of his sin, at least in his own mind, is his hard-hearted resistance to God's power. Basically, he just doesn't want to be like his father.
Section 5. The internal rebellion. Using intellect as a weapon.
But listen, John is not powerless. He begins this quiet internal rebellion, using literally the only tool he has, his mind. When a terrifying white school principal singles him out in front of his class, telling him he is a very bright boy, it changes absolutely everything for him. John suddenly apprehends that his intelligence is a unique power. It becomes both a shield and a weapon against Gabriel's physical and spiritual dominance. It's the one thing his father cannot reach, and John cherishes his hatred and his intelligence equally, kind of feeding one with the other. Interestingly enough, this directly mirrors Baldwin's own real-life awakening as a brilliant young student in Harlem when he realized his mind was his ticket out.
This intellectual awakening fuels some incredibly vivid daydreams of secular escape. He imagines becoming a great leader of his people, enjoying secular wealth, drinking expensive whiskey and smoking cigarettes. He wanders past the stone lions of the public library and looks down Fifth Avenue at the wealthy white world. We all have our versions of mental escape when we're feeling trapped, right? But for John, even a daydream of going to a public library is an act of desperate rebellion. These secular visions serve as a stark, desperate alternative to the darkness of the church tabernacle, where he spends his Saturday evenings sweeping the floors.
So the crucial point is this. John's spiritual crisis isn't just about theology. It's deeply, deeply personal. He realizes that he cannot bow before the throne of grace without first kneeling to his Father. Because Gabriel essentially represents God in their household, rejecting God is fundamentally a way to reject his abusive father. Surrendering to salvation means surrendering to the man who beats him.
Finally, Section 6. The threshing floor. The final crucible.
If you're not familiar, in Pentecostal tradition, the threshing floor is the physical space right before the altar. It serves as a spiritual crucible where a sinner is literally broken down by the Holy Ghost in order to be reborn. When John collapses on the floor during the Terry service, it is not just a religious event. It is a brutal, violent, psychological battleground.
While he's down on that floor, struck by the power, John experiences sheer terror and sensory overload. The text says, "Nothing remained. All was swallowed up in chaos. Only the ironic voice insisted yet once more that he rise from that filthy floor." He feels like he's descending into this absolute void, coughing in the dust, battling a dark, shapeless weight in his mind, just absolutely terrified of becoming exactly what he has spent his entire life trying to escape.
Yet, he emerges. In a climactic moment, still covered in tears and sweat, John actually forces himself to look right into his father's furious, unsmiling face. To conquer the immense division between them, he speaks the authoritative, living word. He tells his father, "I'm saved, and I know I'm saved." And the congregation rejoices, fully believing the rebel has been brought back into the fold.
But as we step back and look at this as scholars, the source material leaves us with a profound ambiguity. And I want to leave you with this provocative question to ponder. Is John's salvation on the threshing floor a genuine spiritual victory? Or, by speaking those specific words to Gabriel, is it actually a tragic surrender of his hard-won personal identity right back into his abusive father's domain? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.